You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Welcome to One Bite is Everything, the podcast that examines the food on your plate from pretty much every possible angle and connects it to the rest of the world and to issues that are important to you. It's incredible how much is connected to our plates. Astonishing, really. If you've been here with us before, you've already heard from Wes Gillingham and you know the depth of knowledge he brings to farming and policy. But in our last conversation, I held back one piece because it deserves its own spotlight. Today, we're diving into something most of us know nothing about, and frankly, it's gross. Sewage sludge, or as regulators like to call it, biosolids. It sounds technical, even harmless, but what it really means is human waste mixed with pharmaceuticals, microplastics, and industrial chemicals being spread on farmland. This is one of those hidden realities of farming and regulation that consumers rarely hear about, but it has huge implications for our food, our health, and our environment. Wes explains what sludge is, how it ends up on our fields, and why banning its use is becoming urgent in states like New York, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. Stay with me. This may not be a pretty topic, but it's one we have to understand if we want safe food and healthy farms.
There's a bill that Anna Callis has introduced into the Assembly and one that Pete Harcum and Michelle Hintry have in the Senate, which would ban sewage sludge spreading. So right now, there's a sludge issue in the state in terms of public waste treatment facilities that take our sewage.
New York's proposed legislation to ban the spreading of sewage sludge on farmland represents a crucial step in addressing a silent but growing public health crisis. Biosolids, essentially concentrated sewage, are not human waste. They're a chemical cocktail, including PFAS, or forever chemicals, pharmaceuticals, microplastics, and industrial byproducts. While Albany County has already implemented a moratorium, the state bill, currently under review in the Assembly's Environmental Conservation Committee and the Senate's Agriculture Committee, would prevent these persistent toxins from entering the food chain altogether, aligning New York with states like Massachusetts and Connecticut, which are moving aggressively to phase out land application of biosolids. By halting this practice, the bill addresses both environmental degradation and long-term human health risks, offering a rare policy win that targets a preventable source of chemical exposure.
They do a really good job of cleaning most of the toxins out so that then that water can then get released into a water body, wherever that is, along a river or on the coast. But what they're doing is actually concentrating the sludge into a form. And there's Class A and Class B, and that's basically the classes are divided by the number of pathogens in that. So Class A biosolids are ones that have been permitted to go to a facility to get dried or pelletized, heat treated, so that pathogens are much lower. Class B biosolids, you can get a beneficial use determination through New York State DEC, and then you can use that as fertilizer on a farm. So there's some direct spreading, like I said, with the Class B, but then there's also the Class A biosolids that are composted or treated. Just recently, Albany County created a ban or a moratorium on biosolid spreading because they were getting biosolids, sewage sludge. I like to call it sewage sludge instead of biosolid.
Poop, right? It's poop.
Poop is not the scary part. The scary part is its industrial waste is also coming through there. Pharmaceuticals and PFAS. PFAS, the forever chemicals, are getting concentrated in the sludge and then spread on our farms. There were farms that all of a sudden the PFAS levels impacted people's health, And then the health department in Maine tried to figure out what was going on and discovered that these farms had this stuff spread on their field multiple times 30 years ago. They didn't even know about it, the farmer who purchased the farm.
So it's byproducts of pharmaceutical production?
No, it's a byproduct of our sewage sludge system. So in New York State, 30% of the sewage sludge that is generated is actually coming from downstate, from New York City. And then they're trying to figure out what to do with it. They take, like, across the state, like somewhere is around 18% of the sewage sludge is allowed to be spread on fields or composted.
Sewage sludge is far from an inert fertilizer. It's a concentrated cocktail of industrial, pharmaceutical, and household chemicals that escape standard wastewater treatment. According to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, over 80,000 synthetic chemicals are in circulation, and many, including flame retardants, antibiotics, and hormone disruptors, end up concentrated in biosolids. In fact, studies show that fields treated with sludge can contain detectable levels of more than a dozen pharmaceuticals even years after application. One investigation in Massachusetts found antibiotics, anti-inflammatories, and anti-seizure medications persisting in soils decades after repeated sludge applications, raising concerns about long-term soil health and microbial resistance. The sludge applied to farmland may seem like a recycling solution, but it effectively transforms agricultural soils into chemical sinks, exposing crops, livestock, and humans to compounds that were never meant to be ingested. How are the PFAS getting in there?
Various ways. I mean, when you talk about a sewage treatment plant, you're talking about, the local garage, the metal facility. They have their whole set of restrictions as to what they're putting in there, but there is a certain amount of stuff that makes it through. Then the other thing is, because it's in so many of our products, whether you're talking about beauty products, or the other thing is microplastics. Microplastics get mixed in there. Microplastics a lot of times have high PFAS levels. And then the other scary part about this is that there's precursors. There's a chemical process. I'm not a chemist, so I'm not going to go too deep into this, but you get a mixture of these chemicals and new PFAS or PFOAs are formed because they're all mixed in this biosolid. And then the other thing about it is, while the state is requiring the facility to test the stuff that's coming in, but they're not testing, the final product as it's going out. It makes no sense to me whatsoever to be spreading this stuff on our farm. And then if we're getting exposed to PFAS and then we're releasing that into our waste stream, and then it's going back and then we're eating it again. Like, how much sense does that make?
PFAS contamination from biosolids has emerged as a particularly pressing issue due to their extreme chemical stability. Nicknamed forever chemicals, PFAS do not biodegrade, and research indicates that they can travel through soil into groundwater, where they persist for decades. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, has linked elevated PFAS exposure to immune suppression, thyroid disease, developmental issues in children, and certain cancers. Even low concentrations can bioaccumulate through the food chain, affecting milk, meat, and vegetables, and in some cases, PFAS levels in sludge-amended soils have exceeded the safety thresholds recommended by the EPA, which highlights the inadequacy of current testing and regulation for long-term exposure risks. These chemicals often interact with other contaminants in sludge, creating novel compounds with unpredictable toxicity, an area of active research with alarming preliminary findings.
So it is in the Ag Committee in the Senate, and it's in the ENCON Committee in the Assembly.
And where does this sort of issue, like what's the precedent, like with other states? Are there bans?
Maine has banned it. Massachusetts is working on banning it, and Connecticut, they're in process of implementing it. I think it was passed, and it either is about to pass or just passed, and they're implementing it. That's the other part of this is, like I mentioned, the A and B classes. The A class isn't tracked by the New York State the way the New York State gives you a beneficial use determination and it can be spread. But the Class A just comes into the state from like the Deer Isle waste treatment facility in Massachusetts, which serves Boston. It's one of the top three largest waste treatment facilities in the United States. And they're selling their pelletized sewage sludge to farmers as a cheap fertilizer to be spread in New York State. So I do believe that we need to get it out of all our products, but that's fairly complicated and is going to take years to succeed at, whereas just stopping from putting it on our food makes more sense to me right now.
The socioeconomic implications of biosolids spreading are significant. Rural communities often receive sludge from distant metropolitan areas because it is cheaper than chemical fertilizers. But these communities bear disproportionate health and environmental risks. In addition to chemical exposure, concerns over odors, air quality, and potential groundwater contamination affect property values and community well-being. Internationally, countries like Sweden and Germany have implemented stricter regulations on sludge reuse, prioritizing energy recovery or industrial composting over direct soil application, demonstrating that alternative models are feasible and can protect public health while reducing waste, transitioning away from land application of untreated or minimally treated sludge could mitigate both environmental and social inequities inherent in the current system.
And I've even heard people say, well, they're not spreading it on food, they're not spreading it on a broccoli field, but they spread it on a hay field and then a cow eats it and it's in the milk. And that's what happened in Maine. So it makes no sense for us to continue that practice.
I think it's really important to understand what affects the food on our plate that is really happening behind the scenes and out of earshot. And I'm so appreciative to Wes Gillingham for breaking down the disturbing truth about sewage sludge on farmland, what's in it, how it spreads, and why legislation to stop it matters. This is one of those hidden in plain sight issues. If we don't pay attention, we end up eating and drinking the very chemicals we thought we had already flushed away. I hope this short episode gave you something to think about, and maybe even to act on. If you want to hear more from Wes, go back to our earlier episode where we cover other critical farm and food system issues. I will link it in the show notes. And if you found this conversation valuable, please take a moment to give One Bite is Everything a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and leave a written review. It really helps more people discover these conversations and connect the food on their plate to the bigger picture. As always, a huge thank you to Sonia Dillon for co-production and to Russell Chapa for sound design, engineering, and original music. Until next time, I'm your host, Dana DePrima. This is the One Bite is Everything podcast. And I'll see you here again next week.